Everett Hale had learned, over the last 4 years, that the easiest way to disappear in a room full of powerful people was to hold a pitcher of water. Nobody looked at the man with the pitcher. Nobody remembered his face, his voice, the small nod he gave before topping off a glass. He had worn the black vest and the white apron to 11 of these events. Now, and in 11 events, exactly one person had ever said thank you. Tonight made 12. The ballroom of the Sterling Regency glittered the way these rooms always did. Chandeliers, dripping gold light onto marble floors. A string quartet working through something classical and forgettable. 300 of the city's wealthiest residents, in gowns and tuxedos that cost more than most people's cars. Banners hung from the balconies reading, "The Hale Foundation, 20 years of quiet giving." And nobody in that ballroom knew that. The man moving between tables with a pitcher of ice water was the reason the banner existed at all. Everett had built the foundation with his late wife, Marion, in a spare bedroom of their first apartment, back when neither of them had 2 nickels to rub together, and the idea of a gala would have made them laugh out loud. Marion had died 6 years ago. The foundation had grown into something enormous. Scholarships, food banks, disaster relief, a hospital wing, but Everett had grown quieter with every year it succeeded, until the only version of himself he trusted anymore was the one nobody noticed. Once a year, at the foundation's largest fundraiser, he put on the uniform and worked the floor. Not out of guilt, out of necessity. It was the only way left to find out who his money was actually helping, and who was simply feeding on the shine of it. He refilled a glass at table 6. A man in a navy tuxedo didn't look up from his phone. He refilled a glass at table 9. A woman flicked her fingers at him without a word. The universal gesture for more, faster, invisible. Then he reached table 12, and a young woman in an emerald green dress turned and said, "Thank you so much. I don't think I've had a sip of water all night." Her name tag read Clara Bennett, event coordinator. She had the look of someone who had been running on adrenaline and granola bars since 6 that morning. Dark circles, carefully concealed. A walkie-talkie clipped to her waistband, under the dress, because she hadn't had time to change into anything more practical. She was the reason this gala hadn't fallen apart 3 separate times tonight, and not one guest in that room knew her name. "Long night?" Everett asked, setting the pitcher down. "You have no idea," Clara said, and then seemed to catch herself, straightening up, professional again. "Sorry, that's not something I should say to." She gestured vaguely at his vest. "To the water guy," Everett said, and something in his tone made her laugh. A real laugh, surprised out of her. "I didn't mean it like that." "I know," he said. "Most people do, though." She looked at him a beat longer than the moment required, like she was deciding whether to trust the kindness in his voice. And then her walkie-talkie crackled, and she was gone, weaving through the crowd toward a catering disaster near the kitchen doors. Everett watched her go and felt, for the first time in longer than he could remember, something loosen in his chest. He found reasons to return to her section for the next hour. A napkin that needed replacing, a chair that needed straightening. He told himself it was because her table was closest to the kitchen doors and made for an efficient route. But the truth was simpler than that, and he was old enough now to recognize the shape of his own excuses. Clara, for her part, kept finding him too. She'd catch his eye across the room during some catastrophe, a spilled tray, a florist who'd delivered the wrong centerpieces, a keynote speaker who'd gone missing 20 minutes before his slot, and something about the calm in his face steadied her enough to keep moving. It was nearly 9 o'clock when Preston Vance decided to make an example of him. Vance sat on the foundation's board, had for 6 years, ever since his family's investment firm made a donation large enough to buy him a seat. He was the kind of man who mistook proximity to money for possession of it. And tonight, he'd had exactly enough champagne to stop caring how he sounded. "You," Vance said, snapping his fingers at Everett as he passed table 3. "This wine is warm. Get me a new bottle, and this time chill it properly. Do they not train you people?" The table went quiet. A few guests looked down at their plates. The particular silence of people who disapprove, but won't say so out loud. Of course, sir, Everett said, reaching for the bottle. I'll bring a chilled one right away. And hurry it up. Some of us have actual places to be after this. Vance turned back to the woman beside him, raising his voice slightly, the way men like him always did when they wanted to be sure their cruelty had an audience. Honestly, the foundation should really vet its catering staff better. It's a charity gala, not a soup kitchen. Clara appeared at Everett's shoulder before he'd even turned away, her voice low and sharp. Mr. Vance, that's not appropriate. Excuse me, he's doing his job. There's no need to speak to anyone that way. Her hands were shaking slightly. Everett could see it, the fine tremor of someone standing up to power for the first time and terrified of the cost. But her voice didn't waver. Vance's face went red. Do you know who I am? I do, Clara said. You're a board member who's had too much champagne and is being unkind to my staff. I'd like you to apologize. The silence around the table thickened into something electric. Everett stood very still, the warm bottle of wine in his hand, and felt a fierce, unexpected pride bloom in his chest for a woman he'd known for exactly one evening. Vance didn't apologize. He laughed instead, an ugly, dismissive sound, and said something about coordinators forgetting their place, and stood up so fast, his chair nearly toppled, storming toward the stage where the foundation's board president was preparing to give the closing remarks. I want that woman removed from this event, he announced, loud enough to carry. And frankly, I think it's time this foundation had a serious conversation about who it lets represent it in public. The board president, a soft-spoken man named Walter Griggs, looked deeply uncomfortable. Preston, perhaps we should discuss this. There's nothing to discuss. Either she goes, or I'm withdrawing my family's pledge for next year. It was meant to be a threat that ended the conversation. Instead, it was the moment that changed everything, because Everett Hale set down the wine bottle, untied the apron from around his waist, and walked toward the stage. Clara watched him go, confused, her stomach dropping. She thought perhaps he was trying to defend her further and only making things worse, that he'd lose his job over a mess that wasn't his to fix. She started after him, but a hand caught her arm gently. It was Walter Griggs's assistant, an older woman named Denise, who simply shook her head and whispered, "Just watch." Everett climbed the 3 short steps to the stage. Someone near the front gasped, a woman who did recognize him, an old friend of Marion's from years ago, her hand flying to her mouth. He reached up and unclipped the small laminated badge from his vest, the one that had read Server E. Hale all night, tucked at an angle so the name blurred into the fabric. He unclipped it, turned it over, and pinned instead a small gold badge he'd been carrying folded in his pocket since he arrived. It read, simply, Everett Hale, founder. He took the microphone from Walter's hand. "Good evening," he said, and the room, which had been murmuring with the scandal of Vance's outburst, went utterly silent. "For those who don't recognize me, and there's no reason you should, I've spent the evening pouring your water. My name is Everett Hale. My late wife Marion and I started this foundation 20 years ago, at a kitchen table with $400 and a stubborn belief that people deserved help, whether or not they could repay it." He let that settle. Somewhere near the back, a woman began to cry quietly. "I do this every year," he continued. "I put on the uniform, and I work the floor, because I've found it's the only way left to learn the truth about the people my money supports. Tonight I learned that Mr. Vance believes catering staff don't deserve basic human decency. I also learned that Miss Bennett, who has been running herself ragged all evening to make sure every single one of you had a flawless night, was willing to risk her job to stand up for a stranger in a server's vest. That tells me everything I need to know about which of you understands what this foundation actually stands for." He turned toward Vance, whose face had drained of all its earlier color. "Mr. Vance, I'll accept your resignation from the board, effective immediately. Your family's pledge was never the foundation's only funding source, and frankly, we'll sleep easier without it." The applause that followed didn't start immediately. It started as a ripple. 3 or 4 people near the front, and then it caught like fire, spreading table to table until the entire ballroom was on its feet. Somewhere in that swelling noise, Everett found Clara's face in the crowd. She wasn't clapping. She was standing frozen by the kitchen doors, hand pressed to her mouth, staring at him like she was seeing him, really seeing him for the first time. He stepped down from the stage, still holding the microphone loosely at his side, and walked straight to her. "You should have told me who you were," Clara said, half laughing, half in disbelief, tears standing in her eyes. "If I had, you wouldn't have told me the truth tonight," Everett said. "You'd have told me what you thought I wanted to hear. Instead, you told a stranger in an apron that he was wrong, and a board member that he was cruel. That's rarer than you think. I could have lost my job. You would have gained a much better one," he said, "if you want it. The foundation needs a director of events who isn't afraid of men like Vance. I think you just proved you're exactly that." Clara didn't answer right away. She looked at him, really looked. Past the vest he still hadn't fully removed, past the gold badge, now pinned crookedly to his collar, and something passed between them that neither of them had words for yet, something that had been building quietly across an entire evening of small kindnesses neither one had expected to receive. "Ask me tomorrow," she finally said, wiping her eyes and laughing despite herself. "Tonight, I still have 300 guests and a dessert course to get through." Everett smiled, picked the water pitcher back up off the table where he'd left it, and said, "Then let me help. I hear the water guy's pretty good at this." She let him stay by her side for the rest of the night, the two of them moving through the ballroom together. And for the first time in 6 years, Everett Hale walked through a room full of people who knew exactly who he was, and felt more himself than he had in all the years he'd spent invisible. The Foundation's board voted unanimously the following month to name Clara Bennett Director of Special Events. Preston Vance's resignation was accepted without ceremony, and the following year, at the 21st Annual Gala, Everett Hale stood at the front of the room in a tailored suit, no vest, no apron, his badge in plain sight from the very first moment. Clara standing beside him, not as an employee anymore, but as the woman who had taught him that sometimes the truth needed a stranger with a water pitcher to bring it out into the light.